cool build out.
Thank you. And you are in the podcast space now too.
A little bit, yeah. I mean, I never really intended to kind of make a podcast. I thought about it quite a bit, but I was like, I'm not going to do it. And then, because I love being on people's podcasts, I enjoy the conversation there. But then when Huckberry approached me, they wanted to do a podcast, and my co-host is a good friend of mine, Charles Post, who I've kind of spent time over the last couple of years traveling with and just learning from. And so he felt like an amazing compliment to just my knowledge and skill set. And so I was like, I could see doing this. And then, they showed me the guest list, and I was like, this is pretty fun. Like, it'd be fun to like dive into kind of some stories with these people and just conversations with people that normally I wouldn't be able to have. And so that felt refreshing and fun. And ultimately, it's just an experiment. I'm not like, podcasting is not my bread and butter. It's not the goal. It's not the purpose of kind of, creating an income. It's just more fun. So, yeah.
I've been enjoying listening to it a lot. 2 episodes out, right? Yeah,
2 episodes, more already recorded. We have one with Conrad Anker, amazing alpinist, and obviously just like one of the heroes of mountaineering in that sport, and just such a vulnerable person to talk to. He just has such a wealth of stories. And then Jocko Willink was the first, and he was terrifying to say the least. I mean, he's an intense character and somebody who, he sort of exudes a lot of knowledge and information and professionalism, and just a beautiful soul altogether. But really 2 like heavy hitters right off the bat. Like, I was like, whew, I need to bring my A game here. I wasn't fully prepared for that. So it was pretty rad.
Well, you say not your bread and butter, but you're a really good conversationalist. It's a great podcast.
Yeah, sometimes, I think sometimes out of insecurity, we kind of talk a lot. Myself, like, I notice myself doing that. And I guess from speaking publicly quite a bit and doing presentations or what have you, slideshows, podcasts, in the past and things, I've just really tried to take mental stock of maybe when I'm like projecting, or when and how I'm creating a safe environment for that guest to speak and share. And that's really hard. It's about like relating to them enough, and then learning when to pull back, and then learning when to interject. But like, it's tricky because, usually when I'm on a microphone, people are coming to hear me talk. So I've had to retrain myself to realize like, when I'm doing this podcast and I'm doing this interview, like, it's not about me, it's about them. And I'm just here to facilitate a great conversation. If I can bolster their knowledge or their information with a little insight, great. But it's tricky, it's a little different for me, so I'm trying to learn. Yeah.
Well, I've definitely been enjoying doing this, getting to hear from people in a multitude of different fields, and I'm excited to have you on it today.
I'm stoked, man.
Welcome, Chris Burkard.
Yeah,
this
thank
is so fun to do down here we're in Pismo Beach.
We're in Pismo Beach, California. Basically, we're in the parking lot of my office, my studio, and a spot that I, always intended to try and, create a kind of a commercial space where I could, do my work and have my production space and also my gallery and whatnot. So, it's cool to have you. This is the first time I've done a podcast in a van or in the parking lot, but in our studio, I definitely have recorded quite a few. So this is rad. First time for everything, man.
Absolutely. It's a beautiful studio. I was blown away walking in.
Thanks.
The space you set up, it's so calm, it's beautiful. I want to check it out some more after this.
Yeah, please, welcome. Kick up your feet, hang out.
And I'm excited to talk about what is your bread and butter, if you will. Your work in a multitude of multimedia formats. For people who don't know, you're just a phenomenal artist, and you are creating wonderful images and videos for people to enjoy. Where did it all start for you?
Oddly enough, started in this town, Pismo Beach. I grew up here. And so this kind of small environment is really where I drew a lot of my inspiration as a kid. And it wasn't so much that I wanted to be creative or even that I wanted to pick up a camera and be a photographer. I was never thinking that way when I started out. In fact, all I really cared about was leaving this small town when I was like 18, 19 years old. I kind of picked up a camera and I looked at it as my ticket out of here. And I don't mean that in a way that like, I didn't enjoy this environment, I hated it, but I just wanted to know what else is out in the world. I grew up in, a fairly sheltered home and obviously in a small town, which at times leaves you wondering what else is out there. And I think that if you question that enough, you have this deep burning desire to be like, I don't care what it is. I don't care if I'm scrubbing toilets. I just want to go see what is out in the world. And I followed that dream a little bit. And I think that I realized over time that the camera became that tool for me to see the world. And so I started to pour myself into shooting, landscapes and documenting surfing and yada, 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 which ultimately evolved into shooting editorial work for magazines. That got me, my passport to travel. And the very first time I ever jumped on a plane was for work. I'd never traveled for vacation ever. Never been on a plane to go anywhere besides just interwest travel. So interwestern states. So ultimately I got on the plane, my camera, first time I'm ever going anywhere. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is overwhelming. And I think for the first couple years, I really filtered a complicated world through the camera. And that was challenging because I think that it left a lot to be desired in terms of creating more meaningful images. I feel like I was just going through the motions and just trying to shoot in order to make a living. And I guess I'm telling you all this because I don't want to paint this romantic idea that photography and my career evolved and birthed from this place of passion and altruism. It wasn't like that. It was well, I feel sheltered. I'd like to see what's out there. I want to see the world. I also want to put food on the table because I had nobody supporting me. So it was born out of that. And eventually it evolved into well, I want to care about these environments. I want to speak on behalf of these environments. I want to, advocate for them. I want to tell these stories of these people. All those things have eventually come into play. And that's where I am now. And I think that to steal that quote from Yvon Chouinard, who said, if you spend enough time in these wild places, you feel a sense of responsibility to want to protect them. I can relate to that 100%. That's what happens. You spend enough time there, you all of a sudden develop a relationship. And that's kind of what happened for me. And whether it is telling their stories or advocating on their behalf in terms of environmental initiatives or the people or the places or whatever, that's what's really fueled me now. And yes, the camera became a creative process. I feel like I fell into my creativity, but sometimes people maybe they think that has to come first. You have to be creative and then you have to figure it out. I don't think I started out creative at all. In fact, I think that I started out maybe more stubborn and more willing to put in the hard work than I did with raw talent. And I've always adopted that principle. I feel like in the book Grit by Angela Duckworth, she really articulates that beautifully, that you need to really succeed, you need more than just talent. You need to have grit. You need to have perseverance. And I think that's maybe what I've exuded the most in my career.
Well, that's incredible that there was a shift from just doing something and then feeling much more passionate about it later is what it sounds like.
Yeah.
And that also has to be a cool experience of being able to use your camera to be this ticket to travel. I felt that I ran cross country in college and I remember all those, grueling days of practice and then getting on a plane and going to run championships in another part of the country.
Yeah.
Using what you've worked hard in to get to travel is amazing. Yeah. So how long was it or what was that shift for you where it was just, camera and then it became much, much more? Was it time spent?
I think that what it was in the beginning, it was a lot about just my exploration. Like I said, I grew up exploring this area and this was my world. We're in Pismo Beach. We're in Central California. To the north of us is Big Sur. To the south of us is Santa Barbara County and Los Padres Wilderness. And so for me, this was the extent of my world. And on the weekends, I'd go surf with my friends. We'd be jumping over barbed wire fences, trespassing, trying to find some wave. We'd be trying to go up to some pre-sunrise sharky wave up the coast and surf. And I think that exploration in my youth was really critical. And I still live in that now. I love the exploration. It's evolved from being obviously a lot further, a lot more remote, a lot more distant. And also it's evolved to being more internal, trying to figure out who and what makes me me. But I think that the evolution in terms of where I started to where I am really came through when I started to travel. When I started to get on a plane, go to places, I realized that this act of photography, this act of documentation was going to ask a lot more of me than just clicking the shutter. I couldn't just go to these remote wild places and then simply have a camera and simply be willing to take a picture and hope to create something beautiful. Like it wasn't happening. I went to Yemen, Oman, and Dubai on my first international trip. And I remember shooting portraits of beautiful people and just trying to like emulate what I had seen in National Geographic. And I had no idea what to do. Like there wasn't that level of intimacy. There wasn't that level of connectedness to my subject. And I also just felt like the camera was like this foreign object that I was holding up. And so honestly, there's no greater way to say this than just time was the mediator between those things. Like time was the balancing act. Like over time, I got more comfortable with who I was. I got more comfortable with operating my camera. It became more of an extension of myself. A lot of things came into play that then allowed me to feel more like I could be more creative. And the thing is you're never going to be creative if you're so focused on the technical aspect of how do I operate this thing? Like that's not how it works. Like the camera needs to become an extension of you. And when it becomes an extension of you, you feel less overwhelmed by the technical process. And then you can just be like, oh, well, this is how I get the shot. I'm more focused on the composition now and interacting with my subject rather than the f-stops and apertures of what I'm shooting, right? So that helped putting in my 10,000 hours, putting in my 100,000 images. I think it was just time. And obviously I wanted it all now. I wanted it now. And that's kind of how I operated when I was young. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I think that it left a lot to be desired in terms of my creativity. And it took me a while to really develop that. Right?
That's such a beautiful picture of this camera being an extension of yourself. I think of that for video editing when I was learning a program and you really have to think about what you're doing.
Yeah.
And now it's just, editing. And people say, oh, how did you do that? I'm like, I don't know. I couldn't tell you the keyboard shortcuts. It's really, you just become, more in tune with what you're creating. And I think that's amazing.
Yeah, it becomes an extension at a certain point. And I think it's a bit of a hard thing for some people to learn because you often get this question, well, what was your breakthrough moment? Everybody wants like the hack. Everybody wants like the quick thing, the quick example of like, what would you tell yourself then, now sort of thing. Or what would you tell yourself now back then? And there isn't really anything for me to say other than like, I wish I would have enjoyed the suffering more when I was like living out of my truck, trying to figure it out, showing up at the beach before sunrise with some crappy camera and a crappy kit lens, just, working with the most mediocre equipment, trying to make a name for myself. If anything, I wish I would have appreciated that because I was so focused early on in my career on looking ahead that I kind of lost sight of where I was. And I mean that like emotionally, physically, and spiritually, like it happens. And it's a bit of a bummer, that makes me sad to think about, because there were a lot of amazing experiences that happened when I was young and when I was in that very fragile state that I wish I would have like honed in on and just like isolated and figured out a little more.
I see.
Yeah.
Going back a little bit, you did a lot of photography work with surfing, right? And then is that what you would say you got most passionate about? And then it extended into other things when you started to love the camera more? Was it about surfing mostly? And then you started to...
Surfing allowed me an introduction to like the magazines. It allowed me an introduction to traveling because I realized very early on that me being a landscape photographer, which was what I loved. I loved landscapes. That wasn't going to be an option. I didn't have a gallery. I didn't have the equipment. I didn't have the time to go out and shoot during the most optimal windows. You're never going to be a great landscape photographer if you're like, well, I'm going to just drive out to Yosemite and whatever I get tonight, I get. No, look, those guys are putting in the hours, the days, hiking, bringing the equipment, the gear. It's gnarly, right? It's very real. And I think that's, sorry, the trash truck is driving in the parking lot.
The Vancast for you.
Yeah, the Vancast, baby. That whole experience was something that it dawned on me early on. I was like, this is not going to be what I expect, right? This is not going to be what I hoped. So I have to make a plan B. And plan B was like, well, I grew up at the beach. I understood surfing. I had a lot to learn, but I poured myself into it in an exhaustive way that allowed for me to really like make a name for myself, and I, again, it was despite, the lack of, I think, talent, I was just willing and able to like show up and be there, sunrise every morning, meeting people by going to the beach, right?
Yeah.
Things like that. People nowadays, they kind of want like, what's the quick path to get there? And I know that there are quick paths, but is that going to sort of either contradict, or is that going to kind of make you lose sight of why you got there? Here's my fear for a lot of younger creatives who never had the joy of suffering is that 10 years down the road when you're doing this like I am, and you're being asked to wake up before sunrise and go shoot and whatever it is, the northern lights are out and it's freezing cold and you're tucked in your tent or whatever it is, your sleeping bag. Like, are you going to appreciate where you came from if you knew how hard it was to get there? And I think that's the thing for me is like, nowadays, I think my only skill is just having a very real appreciation for what I went through to make this a career path. Yeah. The amount of suffering, the amount of effort I went through, I'm like, I'll never forget that. It's ingrained in me. It's a tattoo. Like it's like so deeply ingrained. So that level of commitment to this career path and this photography as a whole, it's seamlessly a part of who I am. And I think that nowadays, I just appreciate so much any opportunity I'm given, because I know what it's like to go without.
You talked about people wanting a hack for making it.
The shortcut.
The shortcut, people must ask you all the time, like, how do you do this? Or, really for anybody who wants to succeed in their own career path, how do you, tell someone to enjoy the pain a little bit,
That's the hardest thing is I to be honest, I don't tell people that. Reason being specifically is because I know how impossible it is to tell people, hey, when you're in this thing, enjoy it. I'm saying this from a perspective of looking back. If people ask me like, what's the advice you would have given yourself? I would say, enjoy that moment, enjoy that trial, that struggle of what it took to get here. Because again, like I said, I was so focused on looking ahead. So I think if anything, it's hard for me to explain to people like, hey, like when they're like, well, I would really like to eat good food and I'd really like to go somewhere cool and I'd really like to get a good night's sleep and I'd really like to shoot with good equipment. It's really hard for me to be like, hey, enjoy this because this is the best days of your life. That's impossible. Like nobody is going to see that for what it is. And obviously like my experience was my experience. I can't speak to somebody else's experience. I don't know what their hardships look like. But I do know that if everything had been given to me early in my career or if social media had been a thing and I just was a social media star early in my photography career, which I wasn't, I was doing this for 9 years prior to even getting on Instagram or whatever. I think I would have lost sight of how much I was willing to give to this craft. And I guess that's what I'm trying to urge people to do. And even, my book, Wayward, it's literally a book about stories and projects and photographs and films or whatever that have deep and meaningful resonance with me in terms of what I learned. Like that's the point of writing it. I didn't want to write a book about the highlight reel of my life. I've got 7 books about that. I share that stuff online every day. I want to write about the trials. People, it's super funny. People are like, why don't you ever share about your trials? I'm like, well, I wrote a 200-page book about it. You could just check it out there.
Yeah.
I would rather talk about those things. Those things are meaningful to me. Oftentimes people get a chance to see the highlight reel when I share photographs on Instagram or wherever, or in magazines or in books. But it's specifically when I'm talking about things that are meaningful to me and or making a project to me that's very personal, I want to dive into the struggles because I think people need to understand that even those who maybe they look up to or those who seem like they've got it all figured out, like they went through those same things. And those things are what make us inherently unique. And I think it's really important.
It's so important. And the end result is so much more fulfilling if you have to work for it, right? It's
right.
It's definitely a matter of, just an easy analogy is someone taking steroids in baseball. It's like maybe you hit a bunch of home runs and then you know in your heart that it was easier than maybe it would have been.
Yeah. And it's cool because like when you do have breaks, when you get breaks along the way, you really appreciate them.
Yes.
Yeah, you really appreciate, like, I really appreciate that one mentor who came into my life and helped me out, or that award I got for my work because it helped me here. You have no perspective of appreciating those things if you hadn't had to sacrifice or suffer for something. And I think that word suffering is funny because it I think nowadays in our community, it seems like it's almost just intrinsically tied to like toxic masculinity or something like that, or even like somebody who just wants to go out and like hurt themselves, in the process, But suffering really to me is like when it comes down to the most pure idea of it is you love something enough that you're willing to give up something for it, suffer for it. And suffering doesn't always need to mean physical pain. That's not what it needs to mean. It can also mean mental and emotional withdrawal. Like you're giving something of yourself. I am choosing to not do this other thing and instead do this. I'm choosing to when I remember early on, I was like, I ate Mexican food from Del Taco for like months on end because it was all I could afford. Like 50-cent burritos and tacos, things like that. I would have loved to have gotten like, some amazing, incredible salad or something like that. I couldn't afford it. And so I chose to suffer through that. Like that's what it means. It's like I'm giving up something for something else. To me, the career, the dream, it was so crystallized in my mind what photography could have been. And I had to create that. I had to create a very clear vision of what it was going to be. This is going to be my way out. This is going to be my path forward. This is going to be my everything. I know that's probably unhealthy, to be honest, but this is what happens when you're in a situation where you don't have an alternative. And I think there's something to be said for not having a backup plan. Like I didn't jump into photography thinking, well, I can always go do this. I've always got this other job. I'm going to keep the leash short and I'm going to have this other thing. I jumped in. I quit my job, quit school. I was like, I could always find something else, of course. But I am going to, back to the wall. I'm going to jump into this 100%. There's no alternative. When you have somebody that's so dedicated to the outcome of something and their back's against the wall, it's different. Dare I say almost like that person is dangerous, right? Because they have nothing to lose, everything to gain. And those are the things I wish I would have appreciated. I almost wish in some ways I would have taken bigger risks. Mm-hmm. I would have swung more, I still swing nowadays and I miss all the time, meaning that my projects or my assignments or whatever it is, they aren't always perfect. They don't always work out. I sometimes leave people dissatisfied. I leave myself dissatisfied. I don't get what I wanted, whatever it is. Like I'm taking risks all the time. Back then, I took some risks, some big ones, but I was also very risk averse. And I feel like I wish I would have been more able to do that, So I don't know. This is all perspective. Yeah. This is all like looking back. So I get it. Like I have the luxury now of looking back.
Well, that's incredible because my own personal journey with this podcast, talking with people where you're sitting, I've heard more than one time that I had nothing else to fall back on. This was it. Back against the wall. Like I think that really is a huge factor in people not only being able to follow their dreams, but like staying motivated to do it.
Yeah. And, I also want to be very clear that like I feel like I came from a privileged scenario, a privileged background. Like I am super grateful that I had a super loving mom. I grew up with a single parent and then my stepdad came into my life and I witnessed my mom work so hard for everything that she translated that to me. And I was like, my mom works hard. I work hard. Maybe that translated into a little bit of a workaholic scenario. And I'm dealing with that now. I'm aware of that, but that was what was ingrained in me. But I still feel that even though I was not given the lap luxury, I was given some privilege over a lot of other people. But that being said, even those who have way more privilege, even those who, have the trust fund or whatever, I think they can still absolutely find this same kind of back against the wall mentality. It's just harder. I personally think that for those who kind of rise from the bottom to the top, you have everything to gain, right? Sometimes I think people who maybe come from, the lap of luxury or whatever you want to call it, it's a little more challenging for them to gain that perspective, because if you always have a fallback plan, it kind of provides a safety blanket where then you feel less vulnerable. And that level of vulnerability, when you really are at your wit's end, you're at the bottom. I mean, when a photo editor comes to you and tells you that your work is whatever, you're going to take it to heart. You don't have the ego, because you're like, I'm nothing. Like, who am I? I'm nothing. When you grow up and you have insulation and everything feels cozy and warm, and you're going to jump into this career path because it looks cool and you think it's great, and then all of a sudden you start to hear real world criticism, oftentimes I feel like that's the challenge for some of those people, is they don't know how to process it, right? And I think that's more of a learned trait for sure. But I would say that's one of the big factors. Nowadays, more and more we have a society of creatives that don't take feedback very well, or they don't want real criticism. What they want is a pat on the back, 2 pats, a double tap, a star, a like. That's what they want. And so they seek out validation, and they've been trained to seek out validation. I'm specifically talking about, I think the generation of maybe creatives that have grown up with social media. That's dangerous, because you grow up with this falsified validation that doesn't come from real sources, right? They can become real sources if you get to know these people, if you get to connect with them. But for me, early on, it was about finding people I respected, hearing them out, letting go of my ego, even when it hurt, even when I'd go home and cry at night, like realizing that those people, when they gave me an honest opinion and it meant something, like that was the most important thing I could have had. Because yes, for every 10 like doors that got closed on me and people that were, you're not worth my time, whatever it was, when I did get that one good piece of feedback, you just live on it. It's like a power-up star in Super Mario Brothers. You're like, this is everything. Like, I'm going to cling to your words. That real validation, the type that doesn't come from your mom who loves you and wants to just tell you you're great, and your girlfriend who's like, you're the best. The real validation is so important. It's harder to find nowadays, I think. But the reason I'm saying this is because, and I've said this before, is that you and me and everybody listening, you can be that source of validation for somebody. Like, you can like open someone's heart, mind, life to a new paradigm or a new thought process by simply just telling them what they think about their work. I'm specifically talking about creatives here, those vulnerable, those who are looking and seeking out to know, is my work good? And oftentimes when you're asking, is my work good, you're asking, am I good? Am I good enough? And that's a tricky thing. That's a lot of weight to hold. Like, I hold giving critiques, giving validation, giving feedback, I hold it in high regard. It's not something that's lost on me. There's a lot of humility that I try to approach when thinking about my role nowadays as maybe a mentor or someone like that, but because it was so meaningful to me early on in my career. And I think that can make or break somebody. And I just hope that, to be honest, as vulnerable and scary as that seems, I hope more people seek that out.
That's huge. And that is such an important perspective for creatives, especially because, I've been asked in job interviews, like, you edit a video, how do you respond to, criticism or feedback or anything like that? And I think there definitely has to, if you want to grow, you have to have that perspective of accepting that feedback and not getting defensive. Yeah. Because it only will make you better.
Right. And the truth of the matter, though, is like when I've been asked that type of question, I don't get asked that nowadays, but it's funny. It's kind of the real answer would be like, well, it depends on how it's given. Sure. If somebody emails me and they're super inflammatory and like, well, this is blah, blah, blah. And it's like how gently are you delivering this critique? And hey, some people don't deliver a gentle critique. That's okay. That's their style of communication. But knowing people's communication style and knowing for me, like what I need to kind of like like let the gate down, let the ego down. It takes someone just a softer approach, right? It's hard for me to just like, you hear like inflammatory words like right away, and you're like, it's like your hearing shuts off because you want to protect yourself, and that's ego, and that's okay. Like ego is an okay thing. It's there to protect you. It's built in. And I think that what I've come to learn is that once I recognized early on the communication style that works for me in terms of receiving feedback, in terms of even with my wife and my kids, I become a better listener. Because once I've identified like, oh, well, this is what I need, then I all of a sudden realize, okay, well, this isn't a personal attack. This is just this person's way of communicating is different than my way of communicating. And I need to be sensitive to that. And I'm, okay, this isn't about me. This isn't them saying I'm this. They're saying this work or the thing that we created is this. And I think sometimes that requires some disassociation from you as the creator of the work, the creative of the work, and kind of the I guess the creation. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like collaborative.
Well, it's like if you're so emotionally connected to this photograph you took or whatever this film you made, and then somebody just destroys it. That's really hard.
Yeah.
So you have to kind of realize, okay, like first go in there, and before I get any critique, I'm thinking of myself, what is my own critique? How could this be better? So that when I hear these things, I'm like, you know what, you're right. Yeah, you're right. That's a good point. Yeah. And then if I have, my own creative insight, I'm like, well, why would I justify these certain things? This is why I did this. If they ask, if it matters, sure. I did this because of this. I thought this was blah, blah, blah. And, but ultimately at the end of the day, you need to learn to be collaborative. You need to learn to collaborate with the client you're working with because their creative vision might be slightly different than yours. And that's okay.
Yeah.
And there are projects that I've put out into the world where I'm like, I don't want my name on it because I'm not proud of what it turned into because they wanted it different. And that's okay too. If it's not required, right? There's a lot of nuance to this, but I think that learning to take feedback, learning to give feedback, and learning to appreciate feedback is a complicated subject that requires a little bit of wisdom, insight, and ultimately introspection. And introspection doesn't require, being 20 years into your career and looking back. It can just require taking a moment to reflect on how you did and if you could have done better.
That's important, very important. And conversely, I'm in a job right now where I am the one photo video guy. I do photo video marketing for a hospital system in Santa Clara County. Yeah. But being the one photo video guy, it's not often that I will get feedback that's not like, we want it different, which is very vague because
they don't know photo video. Yeah, they're not like coming to you being like, hey, could you make this edit? Like there's certain things I'm sure you're like, well, that's not even possible.
Right, yeah. So then it's resetting expectations with people who don't know the art form, or, they don't even know what they want sometimes.
So that's tricky too. Yeah. Because I think that a big part of our job as creatives in general is to educate the consumer, the client, the customer, whatever, educate them on what's possible. And a lot of times possibility or possible correlates to budget. Like, hey, if you want animated motion graphics, like that's way outside my realm. I would need to hire somebody. That's going to cost you X, Y, and Z. Let me bring it down to what's possible here.
Yeah.
And it's just a matter of trying to educate, which is hard. It can be also a tricky conversation to navigate.
Yeah.
Right?
Do graphic design now. I'm like, well, resetting expectations. Yeah. Not in a kind way. And also the other side is, this is great. I'm like, no, give me something to do.
Yeah.
I want to be at that writer table where you can really, collaborate and create something that's going to be better than if I was just writing a movie by myself. I'm going to write it with 10 other people and it's going to be way better in some cases. So,
and I think honestly, the idea of collaboration, it's kind of lost. Some people think that to be I don't personally know a single successful photographer who I've ever looked up to who's just worked solo. Ansel Adams had a slew of assistants over the years, tons, I know most of them. Nobody's out there being like, it was just me. I'm lucky to have a studio, like Chris Burkard studio. It's a space where I employ multiple people to help do the projects. I couldn't do the projects we do, the big, grandiose projects without without a lot of hands in the making. That's what credits lists are for. You know, it's not just me on there. And I think that learning to collaborate early on and learning when to delegate, ask for help, all those things, those are critical skills.
Yeah.
The people that really struggle are the ones where they maybe don't ever do that or don't ever learn that trait.
Mm-hmm. This is going to be so important and impactful for people who aren't even interested in picking up a camera. That's huge.
Well, I 100% agree. I mean, sadly, I think the creative process is usually a microcosm for your life as a whole, right? Like learning how to ask for help, learning how to ask for criticism, learning how to get critiqued, learning, you know, even that thought of like when you're asking, is my work good? You're asking if I'm good. Like those are deep-seated, complicated things that oftentimes are very rooted in like who we are as people and our humanity. The creative process tends to just put it out there because you are basically excreting a part of you into a project, a photo, a film, whatever it is. And your DNA is in there, you know? And so you know, as I said before, you know, you don't really want to be emotionally connected. You're always going to be emotionally connected to it. You are. That's a part of it.
Yeah.
But learning not to feel in some way like, you know, if somebody's calling this work bad or if somebody in some way that they're calling you bad, that's the hard thing, you know? And I love the idea that creativity is accessible to everybody.
Yeah.
It's not something that like is just, you know, limited to you know, the random select few. The beauty is that nowadays, anybody who has a phone, you can be a creative person or a creator.
Yeah.
I love the fact like that you know, the blossom of photographers that, you know, the kind of the burgeoning of photographers that are now out there in the world is endless. And some people really hate that. To me, I'm like, well, isn't the point for me to like share the craft so others can feel the same joy? And if that's the case, then why would I be threatened by other people with a camera or other people telling stories? In fact, I think it's amazing. I love it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oftentimes people even tell me, oh, I wish I was creative. And to that point, sometimes I don't know if people must ask you too, but I say, perhaps you're creative in a different way, like the way you care for people in your job. You're a creative person in the way you problem solve. Do you ever get that question?
I do, but I also think that like sometimes even if you're like, well, you're creative in the cubicle, like I think it's important for people to have a creative outlet outside of that. Like I am a photographer by trade. That's my job. I pursue a lot of other creative outlets outside of photography.
Yeah.
Like fully. Like that's the key thing is like the creative process never stops. When I go home, I'm thinking about, you know, what else could I do? I'll ride my bike, I'll mountain bike. That's a creative outlet. Feels creative. You know, it doesn't feel as rigid. In the beginning, it felt very rigid, very scary. Now it feels more like, you know, I'm riding and you're flowing through this thing. You're like, what am I going to do? Am I going to jump here? You know, like, that's fun. Surfing is a creative outlet. It engages the creative part of your brain. It also engages the other part of your brain. So I seek out things like that where whatever it is I'm learning, how can I apply creativity to it? How can I make it my own? How can I ebb and flow, you know, and not feel like it's too rigid? And that's why like it's a tricky world when we have these like guidebooks for the creative process. Like, isn't the creative process, shouldn't it be just this kind of, you know, kind of intuitive thing?
Yeah.
And yes, you want to learn, you want to do better, but to relegate creativity down to just a simple formula, so dangerous.
It's really making your life kind of a choose your own adventure. Are you, for me, you know, going on a trail run in Santa Cruz, for example, I'm gonna jump over that rock, like mountain biking too. You're gonna go that way and really using your brain to switch things up and stuff.
Yeah, engage. And that's the difference. It's like you say you go on a treadmill and you're just like, you know, you're like running and you're just going through the motions, like versus like I'm in the woods. How much water do I have? How much food do I have? Do I have a jacket? What's the weather doing? Is that an animal over there? Is there a mountain biker? Is there a horse? I'm running through this trail. I've got to focus on this trail. I'm looking. You're engaging. Oh, I smelled something. Like you're engaging the senses.
Yeah.
Very different experience. And I think there's time for both. One is usually a creative process where we have engaged the creative part of our brain because we're problem solving. One is more formulaic. I just have to move. Water's here. You know, that's it. So I think that creativity, again, to your point, it doesn't need to be with a camera, with a paintbrush, with your voice or whatever it is. There's a lot of ways to engage it. I just think it's a matter of recognizing the part of you that like, what do you What are you drawn to? And then engage in that,
And talking about that, what you're drawn to, and you being a photographer, often being in nature, would you say that that's important for humans as a whole, that we should always try to get out to nature? Do you think that's important, or do you think it's a matter of trying to, again, just find a way to be creative in your own environment, whether that be a city as well? Do you think there's something about nature that you would encourage everybody to go explore?
Well, I mean, obviously, I think that's a trick question, but I mean, of course, I feel like a lot of the world's most complicated questions can be answered in nature under whatever you want to call it, meditation or thoughtfulness or just being there. I mean, I think that to me, a lot of joy comes from stripping away sort of the mundane aspects of daily life, the sort of trivial things that kind of come up on a day-to-day basis, and really just being in an environment where you feel a little vulnerable. To me, I think the vulnerability in nature is critical, right? And that can be a lot of different things. I mean, like, what does that mean? Like, does it mean the treadmill? No, it means like being in a place where you're kind of like, I'm a little engaged. I'm thinking. I'm aware of my body. I'm aware of my needs. I'm aware of my desire for thirst and food, and like those are vulnerable things because deep inside of us, what we care about are our primary needs. And to me, this is part of why I love like things like ultra endurance cycling or trail running or swimming in the ocean. You want to talk about vulnerability? Go jump in the ocean up to your neck. Like swim around in the ocean to the point where your feet can't touch the ground.
Yeah.
I mean, that is I don't know if we can cuss on this, but that is a very, very good way to immediately put you in a primal situation where you're like, whoa, okay, wow, I just reset my whole life. I've done it. I mean, I've literally gone back from trips where I've been working and grinding, and I go out to the beach and I just go for a body surf. And I'll go just to the point where I can't touch, and I'm like, wow, because the ocean is raw. It's moving. It's dynamic. You're like, I am not the biggest fish in this pond.
Yeah.
Obviously. But the point being is like, yes, a lot of other things do that, mountain biking, trail running, blah, blah, blah. These things can do it. And being physical in the outdoors is great. Just even walking, even hiking, whatever. But the point being is that when you subject yourself to those things, you realize how big the world is. You realize how insignificant you are. And ultimately, I think for me, I'm looking for experiences that bring me back to a more primal state. Why? Because I think it's critical if you want to have a clear thought, if you want to have intuition, if you want to have something that comes from a more pure place, you need to strip away some of the other BS. And a lot of times that noise that the world is just constantly coming at us with, it's hard to find places where it doesn't exist. And so I think in my work, I look for places like that, quiet places, raw places, environments that ask more of me, environments where I'm picking up the camera and I'm like, oh, my fingers hurt. How long can I hold my camera out of this plane window until I can't feel?
Right.
How long can I expose my face to this wind until I'm going to get frostbite? Things like that. And again, this is a suffering aspect of what I love about it, but it has a purpose. It brings me back to what the primary needs.
Right.
Right. And when you're in those places, when I'm in the ocean, the first thing I think about is like, oh my God, like I love my kids. I miss them. I miss my wife, and then I start to think, and I'm not thinking about, I got this meeting at 2 p.m. Better jump out of here. Like, what should I think about for this creative call? I'm not thinking about that. When you're in the vulnerable place, your mind goes back to your most primary raw version of yourself, which I love.
Absolutely. You're adding friction to your life, which helps you to, see the world in new ways and problem solve. And
for thousands of years, we have done this.
Yeah.
We have had friction.
Yeah.
You need to go from one village to the next. You need to cross that river. That river has killed a lot of people that you know. You better not go at this tide, whatever it is. Oh, you're going to go out in the canoe today or the kayak or the fishing boat or whatever it is. Well, you have about a 70% chance of survival, but there's a 30% chance you won't. Like, that's friction. That's real friction in our lives. And you put it beautifully. That's needed. And I think that the creative process is kind of adding to that friction.
Yeah.
Because hopefully you're putting something out there that some people love and some people don't.
Sure.
Like that's friction too,
People will connect with it. If you're staying true to yourself and what you want to create, there will be people who, connect with that. And that's an amazing thing, a community that you can create through that. When I was 18, I started doing like ultra marathons and stuff. And I
No
did
way.
I
Rad.
did a 50 miler out in the Marin Headlands.
Sick.
And I remember just being totally brutalized out there in the mountains. It's 2 25-mile loops. You're climbing 5,000 feet each loop. And I remember like hallucinating at one point, then your body's so on edge, you have some gummy bears or something, you get brought back. I probably didn't do it the right way.
Sounds like you didn't if you're hallucinating.
No, absolutely not.
But I love where you're going with this.
And at the end, well, probably in the middle of it too, I said, I will never do this again. And then 2 days later, you're like, I need to do that again.
Yeah.
And I don't know why that is, because it was so awful in the moment.
A big part of it is like, because you said that, because you said, well, I'll never do this again. And then you realize at the end, you're like, but you're like looking at yourself, checking yourself for bullet holes. And you're like, well, no, I'm fine. Yeah. Like, I'm actually okay. Like, holy cow. Like I just survived that. Look how strong I am. Look what my body's capable of. I owe it to this body to do that again. I owe it to this body to see what my limit is. You know why? Because there's so many people that can't. And there's so many people that never get that experience. And even just to honor them or to honor your own self, like what a joy, what a gift. Yeah. So rad.
It's amazing. At the end, I wept, I surprised myself. It was beautiful. And I think still to this day, I'm still trying to put into words like, why? Yeah. Why was I so emotional?
It's okay if there's not words. That's the cool part. Like we oftentimes force ourselves to say something about an experience. Social media is the worst at it. Okay. You shot a photo. It's got to be instant. Here's my photo. I just had this life-changing experience. Not even sure what I'm supposed to say. Guess what? I'll just use somebody else's words. The mountains are calling and I must go. Like, what a loss. What an opportunity lost to have said something yourself. And I think that the best experiences, they require us to feel. I was just reading this quote earlier today from a photographer who shot some of the most famous war images of all time. And he said, I'm not using a camera to see, I'm using a camera to feel. And if I can't feel anything when I'm shooting the image or when I'm sharing the image, then how could I expect anybody else to, right? And so point being, like it takes time to process what you felt, sometimes weeks, sometimes years.
Yeah.
And that's okay. That's awesome.
I like that. That's incredible. Yeah. I was going to ask you something else along those lines, if not for anything else, but for my own self, being in a creative space. Have you ever had to wrestle with being in a place and maybe having a camera or not having a camera with you and being able to just enjoy something? I'll be driving down 101 to here and going, if only I had my drone in the sky. How do you stay present without needing to capture everything?
Well, that's a lifelong lesson for sure. But I get asked this quite a bit, to be honest. And I think my answer always oscillates, because I'm constantly finding new ways to do that. First and foremost, I think that we got to keep in mind that when you're on assignment and you have somebody who's paying the bill and they're there hiring you to do it, like that's not my time to go enjoy that place, that thing. I'm not like, being hired by Apple to go shoot in Big Sur. And I'm thinking, man, I really wish I could put the camera down and enjoy this. Like I should have found time to enjoy that landscape before that, or some other time in my life, or on my scout days, or whatever it is. I'm there to create something. I'm being hired as a professional. That's me. Now, in my own life, I'm only hired to do that thing because I am somebody who is shown a level of excellence shooting that. So they would expect, or I would expect me to have probably been in that environment or similar environments. I think that what makes us interesting human beings outside of just being a good creative, whatever you want to call it, is our capacity to translate those experiences into images, photos, videos, whatever, what have you. That process of translating those experiences, it comes with the cost of us being in those environments, first and foremost, without the camera, is my thought. So what I'm saying is that me shooting surfing, my style, my genre, whatever, that comes from years of me going up and down the coast, exploring as a kid, seeing things and being like, oh, I want to document this. And now when the time is right, now I'm in the season of life where I am documenting it. And I think there was a point in my career where I was just trying to shoot everything I could, always spraying and praying, just hoping I was getting something. And now I shoot less and less.
Okay.
Because I've realized one critical thing. I can get the shot, which sounds hilarious. I can get the shot, capture at the moment, what have you, whatever cheesy moniker you want to put behind that, with less images. In the beginning, I was so afraid I was missing out. I was blowing it. I was whatever. Again, I was struggling with the technical aspect of the camera. As you put in your 10,000 hours, you're like, no, it's cool. I got it. 2/50th of a second, F11. Got it. Boom. And now I'm here. And you know what? So many young creatives get so caught up in the equipment. I know people that shoot incredible work with their iPhone. And guess what? Those people, they're probably experiencing more than you or I with our big cameras. Does that make them better than us or us better than them? No. It just means that that person is then experiencing more. Because when you limit yourself and you limit what the camera can do, you aren't sitting there going, well, should I shoot this at f1.8 and 2/50th of a second, or should I shoot shallow depth of field or with an ND or with like, there's so many options. I could shoot 1,000 different variations, right?
Yeah.
If I have my camera, which lens, which I like, blah, blah, blah. The more you limit yourself and you simplify the process, the more you can be present. Because that's what you're asking, right? How do you be present, right?
Yeah. And not worry, should I get that?
So then therefore, somebody who is worried about that, you potentially simplify what you have. You ever gone out and been like, oh, I'm just going to use a 35 millimeter, whatever I can shoot, I can shoot. I'm just going to, when I'm with my kids, I'm bringing a black and white film camera, one lens, boom, shoot it. There's no like, hold on guys, we've got to, it's like, there's just, this is it. This is it. I'm simplifying. Now, when I'm working, it's different. When I'm working, I'm not there to think about, oh man, that was so beautiful. I want to intake this and I want to intake this. And I'm like, okay, the client's needs are this. My experience has taught me this. This is the shot, right? I'm usually calling upon past experience when I'm shooting a bigger commercial assignment. That past experience has been me in the field trying to feel something, trying to communicate and what have you with that amazing wild place. And I think if I've gotten any better at anything over the years, it's been learning when to put the camera down and just be there, learning when to take less images so that I can be there more, be more present, learning to put the camera on my side. Also, I will say this last comment, because I know this is, I'm dragging here, but as somebody who started with photography and has evolved into a lot of different mediums, storytelling, filmmaking, I've realized that, hey, I don't have just this one tool in my tool belt. If I just want to not have the camera here, I can still tell you what it felt like to be there in a creative way, in a creative outlet, because I'm doing that right here. I'm not showing you photos in this podcast. I'm telling you stories. My voice, my lungs, my vocal cords, this is my creative tool I am using right now. And so if I'm thinking about the ultimate goal of sharing stories as the umbrella, this is the umbrella. Photography is just one of the strings, right? That's it. Like it's, whatever. This is like my parachute, and this is just one of the strings attached to it. I've got a lot of other strings. One of those might be storytelling. And that string requires less photos, more experience, more talking to the person who I'm telling a story about, more smelling the roses, no pun intended, but like literally, like what did it smell like? If I'm telling a good story, I want to have all the audible and visual and visceral senses just engaged, right? I want to be able to remember all these things, and that requires more being there. So point being, it's an evolving process. I think it really depends on what the goal is, the end goal, but it's something that I still struggle with and I still think about a lot today.
Well, that's amazing for people here. It's have those human moments without worrying about putting it on Instagram all the time, just experiencing things in a community of people. And I think you're doing an amazing job through your words and through your work to be able to inspire people to get out and create in their own ways. Do you have anything coming up that you're really excited about? I know I just saw some incredible photos in Iceland, of course.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm living there. Insane. I'm living there part-time. I've had a really amazing couple of years there, and it's in a community that I love to death. And And yeah, so I'm living there in the summers mostly, and actually going back next week for November. I'm going to be there in the month of November. And then other than that, I'm going to be going to Japan in January, shooting some stuff. Potentially have a couple projects in the spring, might be going to Alaska, probably back to Iceland, of course. But yeah, I mean, I hone in on the environments I love. There's certain places that just speak to me, and I crave going there. And to kind of further on your last question, going back to places has allowed me to have a deeper connection with them, a deeper experience. I feel less like, oh, I got this one chance, I got to get it now. And I feel like, well, no, there's time. I can get this photo. This isn't the right season. This isn't the right moment. And it requires going back. You give yourself to these places. No wonder I have a collection of awesome pictures from this country. Like I've been there 70 times. Yeah. Why? Because I've involved myself deeply in environmental initiatives, people, stories, government issues, brands I love, things like that. Like it's my commitment to it.
Right.
And then it's returned the favor by giving me some amazing moments.
And I say this all the time to people, but really, even if you don't know someone and you see like a photo that they've captured, I think you can really tell when someone's passionate about a place or thing. And I still don't understand. I'm still trying to like formulate why, but maybe you know why. I don't know why you can tell when you look at someone's work.
I think it's the connection, of course. I think it's the connection and the level of commitment you see in that person to that place. To me, that's it, right? Like, and nowadays we have the added privilege of seeing the kind of the walls come down a little bit, and we get to see behind the curtain of how people interact with places and how much time they spend there. And you see, you know, the Instagram stories, the Instagram posts, whatever. Everybody has their own little miniature magazine. And so because you get to witness all that, you get to really get a sense of who that person is. It's not like you're seeing my work once in once every couple months in a magazine published. You get a perspective for what I feel about the place. And I think that helps too. Yeah.
Well, beautiful. Well, I know we're short on time here, but
dude, that was awesome, man. I appreciate the questions.
Come back anytime when you're back from your trips, and you're welcome on the Vancast.
You got to put the van on a boat and take it over to Iceland, and then we can just do it there. Yeah,
let's do it.
That'd be sick.
Thank you so much,
dude,
Chris,
thanks,
and we'll do it.
I feel like I'm at the tippy top of my game. Look